This is a test of the emergency broadcast system.
In 5, check for sound. 4,
It's showtime.
3,
Let's
2,
go.
1. Welcome to the Pro Audio Suite, a podcast for audio and voiceover professionals. Don't forget to check us out on our Facebook, the Pro Audio Suite Podcast. Now let's get on with the show. From Los Angeles, George Whittam. From Chicago, Robert Marshall. From Sydney, Australia, Robbo. And from sunny Melbourne, Andrew Peters. This is the Pro Audio Suite. This week our special guest is someone we've had on the show before. In fact, one of the first show we ever did, come to think of it.
Yeah.
It's a guy I came across via a video that went viral about the reinvigoration of Detroit. At the time, he was with Low Campbell Ewald. Since then, he's moved on. You may remember him, you may not. But anyway, if you haven't come across him before, I think you're going to find this riveting. He's a creative director at Weber Shandwick these days. His name is Ian Lanovich.
Hi, guys.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm excited.
You are an excitable chap, which is probably a good thing in the industry we're in, to be slightly excitable. I think that's what one of the prerequisites of certainly being creative.
I agree totally.
So, Ian, my question to you, being a creative director at one of the biggest advertising agencies in Detroit, is you probably do quite a few remote sessions, I'm guessing. And the reason we wanted to get you on the show is because we've never actually asked anybody in your position how they feel about people working, like myself, remotely. The issues of quality, of being able to direct, having eye-to-eye contact. What's the main thing, if you ever do a remote session, that actually does bug you?
I don't really have much of an issue with working remotely. I've done that, throughout most of my career, whether it's, if you're in Detroit and let's say you hire talent in, another state or somebody in New York or LA, you're constantly having to patch into their studios anyway. So I think for most of my career, I kind of, I learned that was pretty much the norm of, not being able to see the person I'm working with. So I don't think there's really, obviously if I'm sitting in the room with someone, I feel like I can give them easier direction and, they can understand what I'm saying. But I haven't really had an issue there, and I definitely haven't had an issue from a quality standpoint.
So what sort of technology have you used in the past? Because I should, mention that Robert Marshall, who's with us, is the founder of Source Connect or Source Elements. Is that the standard for you, or is it still ISDN?
I think like right now in my current position, I'm doing a lot of social media work. And with social media, you're kind of taught to build everything not dependent on sound, right? So we're actually not using a whole lot of voiceover in most of the executions that we create right now. But it seems like what we're doing more of than I ever recall doing is case study videos, presentations, not to sell work to clients, but, and often creating the client's presentation, in order to, like one of my clients is General Motors, so we might do presentations for General Motors to then go on an investor roadshow or things like that. So a lot of the voiceover that I've been doing recently has been for presentation work and for case study videos, in that case, we're not looking for top-tier talent. We're looking for somebody who sounds right, for the story that we're telling, and we're looking for somebody that has a nice, clear, and clean read. So I know I have an in-house video production team that we usually do for kind of like smaller to medium budget jobs, and they tend to use Voices.com. I don't know if there's a specific reason they choose Voices.com over some of the other tools out there. But a lot of times we'll just write a script, hand it over to our video team. Next thing you know, sometimes a few hours later, they'll come back with several different reads, and then we can react to those. And in some cases, we'll go with what we were provided, and in other cases, we'll actually schedule a live record. Does that make sense?
That's it. Yeah. It's funny you should say Voices.com because they were certainly in the news a lot and still continue to be. Not for good reasons, unfortunately, but that's another story in itself. So how do you see the voiceover industry changing then? I mean, apart from the mechanics of it, the style of voice, the delivery you're looking for, how much has that changed in the maybe the last decade?
I mean, I think the quality level, I know what we're seeing, right? It seems like there was a big explosion of just anybody and everybody creating as much content as possible and kind of shoving that into the internet. And I feel now, the metrics are starting to show that doesn't work, that the lower quality content, just basically doesn't get the engagement, that, most of our clients want. It's not getting the eyeballs on it. So it's kind of like we're going back to, higher quality content, even for something as simple as a Facebook post or a Twitter post. I know, on my clients, we're starting to say post less, but higher quality posts. And that, and that's everything from, the video, the motion and the animation, the voiceover, the sound design. So we've been putting our efforts into creating, what we kind of call hero content, and then, figuring out how to kind of do the day-to-day stuff, without as much effort. And then basically, put on most of our effort and most of our, budget into, the hero, like the higher quality stuff. So I think, with the explosion of podcasts like what we're on right now, and, obviously all the voice tools like Alexas and Google Homes and things like that, which we're really just kind of starting out and figuring out, how that works from a marketing and advertising standpoint. I mean, I think audio is, just as, there's more tools for audio now than ever. There's more people listening to podcasts. I think it's just like any other, kind of newer, not that podcasts are something newer, but, I'll be honest, I've heard clients reference wanting a podcast more in the last probably year and a half to 2 years than I have in the last decade. So everybody's kind of eyes are open to these different voice tools and voice communication methods, but I don't think everyone has a clue what's involved in actually, putting them together and keeping them going.
I'm interested you mentioned in there talking about, post and audio production and all the rest of it. I'm interested to know about budgets in general. Like, it's all well and good that a client turns around and says, I'd like a podcast. But when the client turns around and says, I'd like a podcast and I've got $100 a week, does that just mean we turn around and say then, okay, well, we'll squeeze a podcast into $100 a week? Or do we turn around and go, well, if you want to do it properly, then it's going to cost you $300 a week?
I can't speak for anybody else, but I know from my standpoint, I would be pretty honest with what they have to do in order to make it effective. For example, if you're a brand that can't commit to an ongoing podcast on a weekly basis, for, a year or longer, then you need to figure out a different way to go about it. For example, I was working with a client about a year and a half ago where we were planning a podcast. And I think there's like a perception that it's really simple. We'll just throw somebody in a studio and we'll basically record a whole bunch of stuff and, we'll edit it down and we'll publish it. But they're not really thinking about the fact that, how are you building a listening audience and keeping that audience, kind of going week after week. So one of our recommendations was to do one of two approaches, either basically partner with somebody who's already got that existing following, with an audience that reaches who you want to go after, and figure out how to align your storytelling with their messaging and then approach them with an idea. That would be one way to go about it. Or basically kind of like using the podcast as an influencer. And then the other approach would be to do more of like a limited run series. So do maybe a sponsored podcast that's 6 to 8 episodes, around a specific topic, so that you're not creating an expectation that there's anything to come after that.
I see so much, let's call it rubbish, because that's what it is. There's so much rubbish out there that you turn on a podcast and you try to listen to it and you can't even understand what's being said.
Well, perfect. Same client, that I'm referring to when I was planning their podcast about a year and a half ago. We had mapped everything out. We figured out kind of what our topic would be, what would our, the format of, our 6 to 8 episodes. We figured out a lineup of potential guests. And the one thing that we hadn't figured out yet was who was going to be the host. And in this specific case, the client had suggested that they wanted one of the members of their team to be the host. And it wasn't really the best scenario, so we tried to do a couple trial runs, we recorded it, we had, kind of a fake session, where we had somebody playing the role of the guest, and it basically bombed. And the whole idea fell apart, from that point forward, because we didn't really have, like, our biggest advocate internally, who was going to be the host of this podcast, realized that they weren't the right person for it, and it kind of just fell apart.
How many times has that happened to you, Robert?
Where the podcast falls apart?
No, just someone comes in and says, I want my manager to be the voiceover or the voice of this product. And you have to try and convince them that that's probably not such a good idea.
So I usually don't get really into the casting or decision-making there at all. I've certainly done many spots where the agencies that have said it's a hard and fast rule that whatever, people who work for the agency don't do the voiceover. I've certainly done many spots where it's certainly creative directors and writers who end up being the voiceover on campaigns. And there's actually something nice about that, because usually they just know what they want and they're very self-directing and it goes very smooth. So I don't personally mind that. It's a little bit, of a feedback loop, and there's all kinds of other issues with that, and they never actually get paid $1 like they're supposed to be. So I've certainly seen plenty of times where, like the wrong person is casted and it takes too long to do something because, and often the reason why that happens, to be honest, isn't because the agency casts who they want, but the agency doesn't have the client then hears it and they want something completely different. And so the agency is they're a little bit too insular with their concept of something, and it might certainly be better, but in the end, it's the client who's buying it. And so they end up with two ideas that are not meeting. Here's the idea, but here's the talent, and the two are not, they're not intersecting lines, essentially.
The greatest one for me, in answer to that same question you posed, AP, is back in my radio days, I did 15, 18 years of radio, was the classic of the account exec walking into the studio and saying, the client's going to voice this one. Which was always a rip snorter. And you could usually guarantee that it would be those spots that 2 weeks later, the account exec would again be standing in your studio saying, the client's saying they're not working.
Yes, that's right.
I haven't had a situation where the client was the talent. I see it all the time, and I see it with a lot of, ads out there. And, I don't know. I guess I've got mixed opinions on it. In some cases, I think it could, be transparency and it could be authentic. When you've got the CEO of a company leading your marketing campaign and speaking on behalf of, the point of view of that company, you can't get much more authentic than that. But when it starts to feel forced, we use the term retail messaging, heavy sales-oriented, offer-based messaging, and you've got a leader of the company doing that type of work, it almost feels lazy to me. Like we didn't want to pay for talent, so we're just kind of shoving, one of our marketing leads or somebody like that in the role.
I got a classic there.
You're going to love the way you look.
Yeah.
This was years ago. I'm talking like 92 or something. I was working in Brisbane at a radio station up there, and the local butcher shop decided they were going to run some spots on the radio station, and decided it would be a great idea if their apprentice, whose name I couldn't even remember, let's call him Joe for the sake of it, that Joe should voice their commercials. So Joe came in and was probably 16, 17, pimply faced, and tried to read these commercials, and everyone in their room was just shaking their heads. I mean, their client went, "Oh, that's great. Yep, let's run with it." It's like,
yeah, it's terrible. 5
hours of editing later, it finally went to air, and sure enough, a week later, the campaign got pulled because nothing was being sold.
Yeah. The only one of those campaigns that ever worked, and it's gone down in sort of advertising history, is the Remington ad. I loved it so much I bought the company.
Well, there's a bunch of them. There's Wendy's, and there's Papa John's, and there's whatever the Coat Factory. What's it called? There's probably a ton where the someone in the company is the spokesperson for it.
But I think Ian's right. It's got to be the right person.
Absolutely. Yep.
Now, have you ever had a session, Ian, where it's going horribly wrong and you've had to sort of end the session and get somebody else to voice something?
I never have. And now I haven't worked in a whole ton of broadcast television, but I haven't really ran into, I've run into scenarios where we were trying to get reads and just no matter who we read, like, no, not right, not right, not right, and you end up going through way more than what you wanted to go through. And you kind of feel like at the end of the day, man, I should have just, cast somebody for this as opposed to just, putting it out there for everyone. But for the most part, I guess I've been pretty lucky in getting pretty solid talent.
And I'm sort of interested from your point of view, receiving all those auditions for the jobs that you put out there. In terms of time and money, is it not worth your while just to cast the person you want and pay them to do it?
Yeah, I don't have a strong point of view on this one. So when I started at my current agency, I inherited a on-site video production team. So in my prior role, I usually dealt with third-party video, production and post. And when I came into this agency, a lot of the, I would say, day-to-day work was being handled by, our internal video production team. And they just kind of, whenever it was voiceover, they didn't really cast anybody in sessions, more or less. They just used the online tools. But that's also because they didn't really have creative direction. It was more or less a design studio or a video production studio that they just took requests and just executed. So when I started, the goal was to build, a more creative agency practice, traditional roles of copywriters and art directors and creative directors. And so we actually pushed this team to start, doing casting. But when it was quick turnaround, and, I need something in the next 2 days, and it's for kind of a low-budget piece like a case study video or for a presentation, we kind of just didn't argue it, But if we were doing ads for our client, we tended to, at least patch somebody in and cast somebody for the role.
So is that because it's a union, non-union thing? Or you talk about the payments. Is that the reason, do you think?
On my side, my agency is not a signatory SAG. So, most of the talent that we use and most of the work that we're doing is for social media, for PR purposes, primarily all digital. So we don't tend to go through union unless, our client is kind of demanding it or if, there's a certain circumstance that we need to. So I don't think it's really, I think it's just that kind of what this team was using before I got there, and they just kind of, stuck to it.
What about you, Robert? Do you use mainly SAG talent, or are you non-union?
Most everything we do is SAG and AFTRA. There is a fair amount of stuff that gets done non-union. What actually sometimes happens is that if it's like the agency's a signator, but they have some project that doesn't have a budget. So then what they do is they just have the whole thing produced through somebody else, because then they're just paying a fee, and we didn't know that they hired a non-union talent. So it becomes like a way around that situation for them. But I'd say like 80% of what we do is union. And we don't get into the casting too much. The way casting used to happen for us is like, I remember back in the day when we'd actually do castings and people would come in. But if the agencies want us to do the casting because they don't want to rip through 500 files, and they just want us, they kind of trust us to have at least a good idea of what they're looking for. So we used to just use VoiceBank, and then we would call that down to 25 or 50 or maybe 100 at the most of for them to pick. What does happen now that VoiceBank went by the way of voices.com is that you just sort of know who the agents are, and you just have a group email, and you're like, here's the direction, send. Here's where you upload your files to. Done. And then we go through them. And so that's sort of like what casting has become for us, just from but it used to go through VoiceBank, and then sort of the whole casting thing, at least from the union perspective, just blew up. And I know that there's redefining space now in a sense.
Mm. So, Robert, how do you find when you're dealing with an ad agency, like, Ian being a creative guy, how has that changed for you in the last, decade?
Hasn't really, other than honestly just the in-house thing. so my question to Ian more so would be like, how is it going out of house compared to in house? And I know that's like a really tough question to answer, but certainly for us, that's changed the business landscape. But the work itself, the workflow, really hasn't changed. Some of the bidding's changed. I mean, it's no longer hourly for the most part. It really is like, firm bid. And so that's changed. But once you're doing, like, as the engineer, not the business side of it, that hasn't changed. I'm not getting into casting that much, if at all. So I always get that question a lot when someone finds out that I, do sound design and mix for TV commercials. Oh, here's my demo. I'm like, wrong guy. Nice, but really this is just going to flow through your agent, and that's who's going to get the request for a.
Oh, I wonder why you never
audition.
replied to my email with my demo. It all makes sense.
Ain't that the truth?
So the question was that Robert asked Ian, how is the difference between working in-house opposed to out-house in a post-house?
It's nice to have an in-house because you've got them right there, right? So I can activate them at any point in time. And the way that, we've handled, staffing for our clients, we kind of treat producers and editors very much like copywriters and art directors. We didn't set up a system where there's a difference between, what some agencies consider creative services versus production services. To us, it's all one thing. So if you want to spend 20 hours with an art director messing around with a layout or, to create a identity, that's no different than sitting there with an editor and messing around with some, video footage and, seeing what you can create out of it. One of the things I noticed when I started at my current agency, my prior agency, editors were editors, producers were producers, shooters were shooters. And when I came into my new role, it was like everybody did everything. So I had a crew of, they all had the title producer, but they were all editing. They were all, shooting cameras. They were all doing photography. They were all actually producing jobs. So one of the things that we did, when I started to kind of, really build the more creative practice was being honest with what our capabilities were. Before I was there, they were pretty much looking at it as a revenue stream and trying to shove every project through our in-house video team, even if the work wasn't right for that team or not. So I think what we do is we look for, no matter what, we look for who's the best, to handle the job, whether it's in-house or out-of-house. But in a lot of cases, especially when you're working in social media, it's nice to maybe have a production company or a post-production company kind of do the initial set of content, but then transfer that footage in-house so we can do a variety of different social executions or cutdowns. We're starting to do a whole lot of stuff now with like Instagram stories. And I'm yet to meet a post-production house that knows how to do an Instagram story or understand how it all works. They all know that it's vertical video, but they don't really understand how it works in different chapters and how it's kind of linear and safe zones and things like that. So I feel like it's easier to have them kind of shoot the video or edit the initial, video, but then send that in-house and our team can kind of become experts in cutting it for the different social platforms.
It is interesting because I do think a lot of the post houses, as we think of it, they're holding on to that broadcast 30-second spot to dear life. And, that's changing. It's much more digital these days. Everything comes with, if there's a 30 and a 15, there's now also a digital spot almost always. And I think that the next thing is and it's actually happening all the time, like the 30 and the 15 fall off and it's just digital. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's something wrong with this thing. It's 47 seconds long. It's like, no, you're no longer in the 30-second world.
Yeah, that's right.
And so like having been in it for so long, I definitely see the post houses being in that rut and trying to fit everything into that context. But I think one thing that's really interesting to me, and I was going to ask Ian, like, where do you see 3D coming into all this? Is this is 3D any good from a marketing perspective, or is it just a toy that's going to kind of go away, do you think, and be like womp?
Are you talking more specifically about like 3D in the sense of like VR?
Yeah, like VR, exactly. Yep.
I mean, there's a novelty to it. You can create some really cool immersive experiences with it. The best that I've seen it used is more in an event space, because what's cool about VR, at least when you have a headset on, is it can kind of create a feeling, right? Like if you're on a, if you're on a roller coaster, in a VR, you actually feel your stomach drop, right? And you can't really do that, by just watching, traditional video. I think the issue with it from a marketing standpoint is that you're always trying to hit as many people as possible. And those people are not going to be sitting at their desks with a set of VR goggles sitting right next to them, waiting for the next VR thing to scroll up in their Facebook feed. So you're always going to, reduce your content to be, what your largest audience is going to be able to comprehend or, experience, without having to do anything extra.
Do you think there's any place for it for like, more dedicated experiences where someone's like, here's our product, walk around it?
Yeah, definitely. And Facebook's been rolling out some newer things. Facebook was actually in the office a couple of days ago and late last week, and we were reviewing some of their new VR formats. But it's not really true VR. It's more or less kind of like 360. But they kind of fake it in a way where it kind of feels like VR. I mean, I still think like, to your point, yes, you can have a more immersive experience. I could walk around a vehicle in a VR setting. I don't have to go to a showroom in order to do that. I can experience a museum in a, through VR. I don't have to actually go there. I think there's a lot you can do with it, but it's kind of for the audience once I've already got you. I think when you're trying to do just straight up awareness messaging, which is the bulk of advertising, it's difficult to use those type of formats in that situation unless you have somebody in kind of a controlled environment like an event where you can kind of give them, a specific experience where you hand them a pair of headsets, you have them put it on, and then you kind of control that experience. I think when you're dealing with like social platforms, trying to just have a VR experience or even a 360 video or a 360 photo come up in your feed when people are scrolling through it at such a fast pace, they're probably going to just pass by it because they don't really know what to do with it. The average person doesn't really know how to experience the formats. We know it because we work in it. So
right. So it's more of the click here for more kind of thing than the actual intro to it.
I think some of the stuff that the media outlets have done, like New York Times and some of the other, larger media outlets, probably BBC and some of the others, where they actually have these dedicated VR kind of news experiences where they could take you live into locations. So you're actually seeing, stuff happen. I think that's really cool because, if you're tuning into some breaking news and you could throw on your, Google Cardboard or your glasses that you got at some event, and just, you could be there, at the spot that whatever's happening. I think that's really cool for breaking news through like 360 and VR. But I think just from a marketing standpoint, it's going to take a while for that adoption rate to get higher.
I mean, probably what it's going to be is the content, whatever it is, someone going to a news feed to watch something in VR, and then, oh, by the way, sponsored by, and here's a VR experience of your car, of the latest GM car, whatever it might be.
Right. Yeah. Serving out. Yeah. When somebody's already in a VR experience, that's the time to hit them with a VR ad. Yep.
Makes a lot of sense.
So,
well, we're hoping for that.
Oh, is that what you're working on currently?
No, I haven't had a lot. I just, as a creator of media, I think it's exciting, and that's like I'd like to see it progress there because I think it's the best new frontier we have. I mean, what was it before that? I was like, oh, HD was great, but it was really just higher resolution of the same thing. Surround sound was kind of higher resolution of the same thing, and it really didn't take off for the exact same reason that most people, even when they do buy a surround sound setup, they just put all the speakers in the front of their room.
Yeah, true.
And I think bringing it back to voice, I think through a VR experience, people can get lost in those experiences pretty easily if they're not accustomed to, doing VR. So, voice becomes kind of your guiding light, helping you understand, what to do next, where to go, where to look, what to touch, what to click. And so I think needing that, calming kind of presence, in your headphones, while you're kind of, going through these experiences is critical.
Now, I know you're a sports fan, Ian, and I'm sure you watched the Super Bowl. And if you did, you would have seen an ad for a beer company that was ASMR, a girl sitting on the top of a waterfall.
I did.
And I watched that ad, and I thought it was the most irritating ad I've seen. It was just really drove me a bit nutty. What was your thoughts on that ad?
Well, what's weird about it is it actually was relevant for me. So I would say about 6 weeks before the Super Bowl was the first time I had ever heard of ASMR. And we just got done. I'm in the middle of creating an album for a client right now. It's a tourism client. And one of the things that we did is we went around the state in the U.S. and we recorded these raw natural sounds like water crashing up on shore and, birds and, walking on leaves through trails. And we recorded like hundreds of these like raw sounds. And our plan was to kind of turn that into an ambient album. And I was taking some of my colleagues through the concept because we've already actually recorded this. We already have the album produced, and we're getting ready to kind of package it and launch it. And one of my colleagues was, "Have you looked into ASMR?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I've never heard of that." And he's like, "Well, you got to look at this." And he sent me some YouTube links, and I'm like, millions of views on somebody just taking slime and shoving it over a microphone head was kind of funny to me. And then I was starting to think about like, wow, we've got all these sounds that could potentially, I mean, I don't know if they'll create the same effect as like some of these ASMR sounds, but so now all of a sudden, if you were to look at my presentation deck, it's got sections in there talking about creating YouTube playlists for ASMR. So as soon as the Michelob Ultra spot came out, I had given my presentation to our client that same week after the Super Bowl. And I actually used that as an example. I'm like, nobody in the room probably knows what ASMR is, but if you were watching the Super Bowl and seeing the Mich Ultra spot, you would have learned that. And we have all these sounds now, so we could tap into a current trend. So they, if nothing else, it made us look smart.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked about
ASMR.
Oh, go on.
I was going to say ASMR is going to make mouth clicky VO talent popular.
What do you mean?
Yeah.
The funny thing with ASMR, we've talked about this before, I could see that becoming some kind of subliminal advertising.
Buy now.
You could just have, yeah, exactly. You could have these like, noises that make you think about something or, sort of subliminal, sort of someone talking in the background. Could be used anywhere.
Well, if you look at, there was IKEA, they did a 25-minute ASMR spot that they put on YouTube that has millions of views, got a whole bunch of earned coverage, and it was all geared towards a college audience. And what they basically did is they created a dorm room, college dorm room with all IKEA products, and they had an ASMR influencer literally like rubbing their hands on the sheets or some of the different, products in the dorm room. So it was a nice way to showcase all these products through an ASMR, perspective.
What they should do is actually have smell SMR, and then they could have it smelling like a spilt bong or something, and that would get the students in for their dorm room.
Smell-o-vision. That's an old thing.
Can I still get my $1 hot dog when I watch that, though?
Yeah. No, but you can have your ramen noodles.
Yes.
So what do you reckon the future of voiceover, as in advertising or any other placement it could be? How do you see that sort of playing out in the next few years?
I got to imagine that it stays just as relevant and just as popular as it's always been. I mean, I don't have any stats to show if there's any decline in it over the last, 5 to 10 years or an increase. But, going back to that point that everybody is getting told to produce content. Everybody's being told that video performs way better than static content within social media platforms. I've watched a lot of paid media buys all starting to shift towards social media. So if that's the objective, if the agency is being told make more video, create more, short form, they've got to find a place for sound design and voice.
But at the same time, you were saying that because, often people are seeing these things, but they're not listening or they're turning them off, that a lot of your focus is more on the visual than on the audio because you're assuming that that's often muted or,
Yeah, it's true. So like you might create a 10-second vertical video on Facebook that is, has like really strong typeface to kind of, help you understand the story. I think the way that we've been approaching it is if a person taps on the video, then give them a more immersive experience, and you might hear the voice and you might hear the audio and music and sound design, but if they choose to kind of just, scroll on it without tapping it, they still get the message. But a lot of times what we're doing is you're creating that content in a package of a lot of other content. So you might be creating longer form videos that are going on the website, or going on YouTube, and then doing these shorter form videos that are going on, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, ultimately trying to drive to the longer form stuff. So I think, people are doing bigger content packages, that would consist of having voice and, music and, sound, but they're cutting it in a variety of different ways.
And I know what happens to me a lot is if I, because like certain platforms will play you the video, but nicely mute it for you because they assume that that's like too intrusive. So you go to a web page, whatever, the video starts playing. And then if it catches your eye, then you click on the unmute and you're like, what is this? And then there's the audio content for you, but the video is often has to be the first, like the thing that hooks you.
But you've also got, you've also got audio. Like a lot of us spend as I did today, a large part of our life in a car. So audio is number one in the car.
Yeah, and I think that the podcast is going to it's just now in these next couple of years going to replace radio.
Yeah.
Because satellite radio didn't take off, not really as much, and people stayed listening to local radio, and there was that local tie-in. But I think that now that essentially, you're buying cars now that have their own internet connection, and your phone is now essentially the head end for your car stereo anyways. And so, boom, here's my playlist and here's my podcast. And I think that the podcast is possibly becoming the new radio station.
Yeah.
And that's really what Spotify is after now.
Yeah. There'll be, as we've said before, there'll probably be like some kind of a Spotify version of podcast where you have not just individual
Spotify
podcasts.
Bought Gimlet Media.
Yeah, I just don't think it'll be individual podcasts. I think you'll have like networks who buy good content. Yeah,
like the Netflix of podcasts hasn't totally emerged yet. There's the Slates and the Gimlets and those channels, and those are probably like some of the biggest ones that are out there, but it hasn't taken off quite the same as something like Netflix. But I'm sure there's a like a subscription service out there that, or feasibly out there, that would be someone who wants their podcasts called and nicely presented and in an easily consumable service.
Well, I think the biggest issue they've got is they haven't taken ours on board. I mean, can't get better than this. Let's face
blow up.
What are they thinking?
That's right.
Exactly. Well, they're obviously not, are they?
I mean, Andrew can talk about anything, and it's interesting.
Yeah. Andrew can talk underwater too.
I should just tell you. Yeah, that's almost true. I think I did on the weekend, but that was another story. But
how do you breathe when you're like? It's all about breath control. So how do you do that when you're underwater?
Circular breathing. You just stick your butt out the water and breathe through your butthole. It's like a whale,
like a didgeridoo, like same style, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah. Look at that whale; it's watching us with one eye.
Yeah, that's right. It's breaching. Oh my god! It's got a cub.
Oh dear!
Now we're heading downhill fast.
We are.
Yeah.
Going back to the union conversation we had a little while ago, I had a case just recently working on a podcast where I needed to cast an American voice and cast a union voice, and compared to Australian rates, nearly fell over at the amount that this person was asking for. And I'm interested to know whether Ian thinks that sort of the prices that are being charged for are actually giving rise to, you know, non-union voices and these places like voices.com, like people with their own home studios and all the rest of it. Is that a factor, Ian, or is it more just a convenience thing that you alluded to before?
You know, I'm like the worst person in the world that, you know, when it comes to money. Like, I have no idea how much anything costs.
Yeah.
And I've been, most of my career, I've had the luxury of working on larger clients or larger brands. So everybody's kind of bought into the fact that things just are expensive. Right. And then when I came over to my current agency, which does a lot of, you know, mostly PR, which is much scrappier, it was almost like the opposite. Like, all of a sudden now I had clients that were used to paying very little for content, you know, and, you know, trying to go with, trying to sell a PR client on a SAG talent's rates would never happen. You would have to figure out a different way to work. Now I'm kind of in the middle. I've got half of my clients are kind of more scrappy PR clients, and the other half of my clients are like large, you know, American brands, you know, that are already used to, you know, kind of SAG rates and, you know, larger scale content plays. So, yeah, I haven't really, like, I personally don't have a perspective on what that talent's charging, but I know that depending on the type of client I work with, and if they're used to working with SAG talent or not, you know, they definitely get sticker shock if they've never worked with that type of talent.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I can comment on that a little bit. I think that the sticker shock is a definite factor, and I think it started around 2000 with the first SAG strike, actually, and that's when the agencies began realizing that it doesn't have to be union. And it at first was like, go to Canada, and they had to find other, you know, means around it. And when they went, oh wow, that wasn't so bad, and that worked, and holy cow, it was like, you know, we're talking about like 10 times less. And also, I've heard producers talk about how much, you know, easier it is, because the unions have like, oh, well, if it's going to go on social media, it's this. And if it's broadcasting here, it's that, and all this other stuff. And then, you know, a non-union guy is like, well, it's buyout for that. Have fun. I'm done. Send me my check.
Yeah.
And simplicity. And so I think that for various reasons, when people have a good experience with non-union, they kind of are pleasantly surprised. And then if they're able to, I mean, if it's an agency that's a signatory, it's a whole different, you know, to change that. But if it's anything that's someone who's smaller, they're very often pleasantly surprised with how it's not so bad with non-union. And there's a lot of like, you know, like people try to put out these horror stories about how bad it is, but there's a lot of really good non-union talent out there, quite frankly.
Non-union's fine, but it's when it gets into that really scary territory where it's like $1 a holler stuff, you know, someone's charging $20 or whatever. Because, I mean, Robbo and I talked about this the other day. It was someone he was working with. It was kind of that kind of rate. And we worked it out, like if you wanted to make a decent living out of doing voiceover and you were charging what they were charging, you would have to do 20 bookings a day, 5 days a week.
Yeah, I don't think that serious brands and serious, like, you know, productions are willing to go that low, because they have a lot of other collateral stuff that's going on. So they're paying for a studio. They value their own time. I think that they want to have as close to that union experience as possible. And I think that's what they were pleasantly surprised by was not that they initially went after it because of the rate. They went after it because they had to. And then when they realized that it, you know, like the whole you get what you pay for thing wasn't totally true. Like, you can pay less and have nearly the same thing if you shop in the right place. That's the other thing about the non-union experience, is that, you know, you got to know how to navigate it yourself. And there's all kinds of pitfalls and other problems, whereas the union atmosphere is much more structured. And so it's much harder to screw it up compared to non-union, where it's very easy to screw it up or book the wrong person and you're paying that person anyways, and things like that.
You know, I've got a point of view on that too.
Yeah.
We did. I just got done working on a project where we had celebrity talent, and there was 2 celebrities, and there was a TV spot involved, and 4 different social media executions that kind of came out of the TV spot. 3 of those executions on social, different videos, the agents for the celebrities kind of considered them alts, so they didn't charge anything extra, to utilize their voice on, those executions. There was an additional social media execution, which was for an Instagram story, that they considered a new execution. And so the celebrity agents came back and said that they wanted $100,000 each for, to utilize their voices on it. Now, this entire, piece of content probably costed no more than maybe $20,000. So clients and agency alike weren't going to spend $200,000 on the voice talent for an execution that was, not even a tenth of that. So basically, we went with sound-alikes, at, I think it was a tenth of the cost, and nobody would know the difference.
Right. I had an experience where we were finishing a spot. We really had everything we wanted. It was actually one of these sessions where we had like 3 talent. I think it was 2 different studios and 3 talent, 1 remote. It was a sort of a collaborative interaction. And at the very end, I don't know who it was, the writer, the art director, somebody says, "Why don't you improvise one?" And they do, and it was great. And I don't know that we even used it, and I don't think we did. But then the next day, all the agents hit them up with like triple fees for improvising.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, what not to say in session? Yeah. And so it's like those kinds of experiences where they're just like, there's just way less red tape with non-union, and that's sort of where I've seen it. It's not so much. I mean, and even if the issue wasn't the price, is like, a lot of the times I've seen it with the agencies where it's horrible to go back and have to rebudget something. So even if they have the money, it's just a big giant hassle to have to, tell their client it's going to cost more, get all that paperwork done, and that's where people become unhappy about that. So I don't know that non-union is so much driven on fee as it is on ease, with the fee being a really kick-ass bonus.
The interesting thing about union, which I completely blew my mind when I first started talking with Jim in New York, and he's a paymaster, was he told me how the structure worked, which seemed really confusing because, say, for instance, the job's $1,000 job. So he will sit there and he will write 4 checks, one to himself, above line, one to the agent, below line, and then one to SAG, above line. So basically, you've got $260 above line on the $1,000 fee. So if you go, it's going to cost you $1,000, and then you get an invoice for $1,260. You go, well, why is it 12? You said 1,000. Oh yeah, because that's because you've got the paymaster fee and you've got the SAG-AFTRA fee.
Like buying a car.
Yes, it is exactly like buying a car.
I tell you what, it makes the Australian model look simple. Seriously,
it does. It is so simple here.
For those who are sort of across the other side of the Pacific Ocean, we basically, so say I'm casting a national TV commercial for a client. It's $380 for a 30-second spot. Is that right, AP?
What, radio?
Yeah, radio.
And then you're done.
Okay. $330 for a one state short term.
Okay. So let's just call it $450.
No residuals.
No residuals, no nothing. You get your $450. I get an invoice from Andrew's agent, send them the check. They take their 12-13%, Andrew gets the rest. But if I turn around at the end of the session and say to AP, mate, I think we've got everything, but give me one how you hear it, it doesn't cost me any more. Because that's what I'm paying for. I'm paying for him to come and interpret my script. So it's really interesting to hear you guys talk about that.
You didn't say improvise.
Yeah, it's not
because all the time it's like, how did you hear it?
If I asked him to improvise, it wouldn't cost me. If I asked him for a character, that would cost me more. That's another $150, $180 or something. But if I asked him to just improvise, that's all part of the fee.
I've seen it before where some talent, like they get into the argument of that's another version or not. And other talent are just very clearly happy to have the gig and sure, I'll read another one. And would you like me to do something on your voicemail? And they're not going to go tattletaling to their agent about every little thing that they might be able to milk out of the client. And so there's a lot less of that, certainly, I'd say, on the non-union side. Yeah. I get the feeling because there's fewer rules.
The more I hear about the union side of things with voiceover in the States, the more I think they're just doing themselves a massive disservice. Seriously.
They've got to be really careful. I mean, there's a reason for it, and I'm absolutely 100% get the reason why you want to be SAG-AFTRA because, like unlike here in Australia, we have free health insurance and we have free pension. But in the States, you don't. So what you get by being a member of the union is you get your health and you get your pension. And that's why they want to do it. And it makes complete sense. I think that
it's not just that. You have an agent that's going to fight for you. You have rates that you know what they are. You don't have to negotiate everything individually. I think that a non-union talent is very often in the position of having to do all of that themselves. And so I think the reason why the union thing works is because you have a very well-defined talent base. You know you're going to get quality. You know exactly how it's going to be executed, even though it's complex. It's like it's a set of rules that works the same for everybody. So you can kind of put it through the machine and it always works. And with non-union, it's always like, how does this, like, how are you going to do it this time? How are we going to do it that time? But from both sides, I mean, like maybe the talent's looking at it and going like, they're only paying this much for these many spots. Like, oh, really? Or vice versa, maybe they find a talent they want and this talent tries to bill things differently than that talent. There's less structure. And I think that that's where, so you get the benefit of lower cost, probably fewer rules, but the downside is probably you have more variability too.
Well, here's one for both of you. In fact, probably all three of you, because with real-time casting, you're involved in the US voiceover market as well, AP. Look down the track 10 years for me, thinking about sort of younger creatives, younger, content creators coming up through the ranks who doing business online is basically second nature to. And then thinking about the discussion we've had in the last 40 minutes, taking on board everything we've spoken about, do you think these online agencies are only going to get stronger or do you think they're going to go away?
Do you want me to answer first?
Well, yeah, go around the table. Let's start with you, AP.
My theory is that I think they will shrink. I think the industry, a lot of the debris that's on the, the masses that are claiming to be voice talent will start to disappear. I'm hoping that the quality will come back where people expect quality and they won't accept anything less, which then makes everybody have to step up. But I also think that people are going to start going back to their little community. I don't think they'll just throw scripts out to thousands of people to audition for. I think they'll get to know a group and they'll stick to that group. I think it'll go back that way. That's my feeling. Could be completely wrong.
I think it's going to go completely gig economy.
Do you think so?
Uber. Absolutely. I think it's too easy for everyone to get into it. And there's a lot of turnover in the, so everyone's used to buying things online. And so as long as it's online and there's people who are jumping in on the supply side and the demand side and all they know is online, I think it's inevitably all online eventually.
Oh, I think it's going to be online. I'm not disputing that, but I don't think it's going to be like a free-for-all. I think it will narrow right down.
I think it will narrow down. I think there will be a few sites that corner the market. Yeah. I think we've seen that with voices.com. There's been pushback, but I think that's just the way big business goes. And there's going to be...
I think the first one that comes in, that is completely transparent, that still gets the work for people, and is quality controlled. So you make sure whoever's on there is, can actually do what they claim to do. And their home studios are high quality and all that kind of stuff, then people will feel much more comfortable about it. But it also means the industry will shrink into, maybe two smaller sides.
Yeah. a couple buckets.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we've had a vote each way. Let's decide the winner. Ian, what's your thoughts on all this?
I think I was interpreting it different in my head. I was just thinking about the fact that, I've got a 9-year-old daughter who's got a YouTube channel. Right? She's got her own microphones. She's got her own camera equipment. She's got her own tripods, her own green screen, and she's 9. Her 7-year-old brother knows how to use that equipment. It's like if you're Gen Z right now and you're graduating college, you grew up knowing how to be on camera. You grew up, hearing what your voice sounded like. I think for most of us, the first time you kind of heard your voice was when you heard it on like a voicemail or, somebody's answering machine, and you're like, "Whoa, that's what I sound like," and
you hated
kids
it.
are learning how, they're hearing their voice and they're learning how to talk into microphones and adjust their voice at a very young age. So you've got a whole, generation of content creators right now that know how to create, know how to use all the modern tools, know what they like. And they're very authentic about how they go about it. Hence the explosion of Snapchat and, just story-based content like Instagram stories and things like that. So I don't really know where it's going to go, but I think, a lot more people are going to feel like they can do it themselves, or they know somebody who can get them what they need, whether it's a friend that knows how to design, a friend that knows how to, shoot a camera, a friend that knows how to, be talent on screen or be voice on screen or on camera. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, we're already seeing it with all these influencers and influencer-based networks and stuff like that. It's just, voice is kind of another angle of that, just like the ASMR stuff. How many of these whisper, ASMR people, are going to go off and do other forms of, radio and podcasts and stuff like that because they made a name for themselves doing, those types of videos.
So when people are looking for talent, be it video editing, voiceover, et cetera, do you think it just becomes who you know and the market is sort of just out there in the general social media and social platforms and just where people are? Or do you think it all funnels into a few conduits, like if you want to get driven someplace, it's Uber. If you want to get a voiceover, it's XYZ website. If you want to find a video editor, it's, DEF website.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're always going to have, I think in just the creative industry in general, the more that we could see each other and be around each other, tend to create better relationships. You get used to the people you work with. You get used to the people that you kind of outsource, your work out to. I just think that there's going to be maybe just a lot more, 20, 30 years ago, there was only so many people that knew how to do or work those technologies, knew how to use those cameras, use that equipment, understood how to shoot certain things, how to photograph a vehicle, things like that. And, that specialty work, I think there's more people that are accepting good enough. And, so you're always going to have your specialists and your higher quality talent, your higher quality shops. But there's going to be a lot more clients that are going to say, I know a friend who can do that, so I don't want to pay that much for it when I know people that can do it for less. I mean, I see it all the time. Like, I don't work too much in app or web development anymore, but now with like Squarespace, and Wix and Weebly and everybody's friend that knows how to code a WordPress website, clients don't want to pay for that anymore. They'd rather put the money into content than the actual build of the website. And, so a lot of those web shops just kind of went under because of it. I don't really know exactly where it's going to go. I just think there's more people out there that are going to be able to do what the skilled professionals were the only ones able to do, back in the day.
Yeah, it'll become less of a black art and it'll become more
right,
common
exactly.
commodity. Sure. I just wanted to round back actually to the sort of in-house, out-of-house thing. And to what degree does the, like the in-house, you're working with the same group of people, so there's a consistency, there's an immediacy, and there's that aspect of it. And traditionally the out-of-house thing, there's been this like, we are experts, but there's also been the And I've often felt this, just working at various post houses where there's a lot of other incentives that are thrown out there, whatever it is, like tickets and food and you name it. Does this generation care about that anymore?
Yeah, like all the perks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I'm 41 now. It's still kind of nice to go to an edit studio and get a free lunch, but I'm also too busy, and a lot of the time, as quick as I can get out of that edit studio, I'm getting out of there and I'm trying to jump onto something else. So I think there's something, I think everybody likes a perk here or there, but I just think, at least most of the younger talent that I'm seeing, they don't even realize a lot of that exists, and they are working with a lot more
that's what I've noticed.
In-house options.
I think they don't even know how it used to be. I mean, you used to have your Coke and your weed paid for.
Nowadays, you're lucky if you've got a window.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You used a razor blade to what? Sorry?
Right.
Cut tape and
yes, exactly. That's where I was going. I'm interested too. There's following on from what Robert asked you. There is the nice side of things, absolutely, in terms of drugs and lunches and all the rest of it. But what about the other things that come with sitting in an edit suite in terms of being able to direct talent and sort of get an idea and sort of feel immersed in the recording, like sitting there watching as the pictures go through while the voiceover's doing the voiceover for your TV commercial. Is that sort of stuff important anymore? Or is that sort of with voices.com where you send the script and you get it back? Is that sort of stuff going by the wayside?
No, I don't think anything replaces being able to sit there in the edit studio and kind of be a part of what's being created. I think that's so key, especially when you have, higher priority work, or work that has a quick turnaround where you don't really have the time to screw up, and you've basically got to get it right on the first go.
Yeah, I call that pin the tail on the donkey production.
Yeah.
The tail on the donkey. You're like, there. Eventually you get pretty close and you never hit it right on because you're just tired of telling the person that they're off.
Just on the back of that question then, Ian, I'm interested in your thoughts. With advent of Source Connect and their products, or Source Elements and their products that are bouncing around at the moment, and the possibilities that become, the faster the internet becomes, the more the possibilities become infinite. If you could sit in your office and do all that from your office, see the voiceover talent in the booth, watch the pictures go by as he's voicing, is that an option, or is that a way that things might go, or is there nothing that replaces sitting in that room with the engineer having those conversations?
I don't know. I just haven't done it the other way.
Yeah.
I think if I were to sit in my office and be able to kind of direct and edit, while feeling like I'm in the studio, and the outcome was just as strong, then I would do it again. But if the outcome wasn't as strong, then I don't know.
Right. I think it goes away. So here's another sort of more back to the in-house, out-of-house thing. How much of the creative interplay and the dynamic changes when you're working with fellow employees compared to a client-vendor relationship?
Vendors never say no to you. Right. So, they might turn around and complain back to their superiors and saying, I've got 7 projects going on. Which one do you want me to do? And this client's asking me to make the 20th change to, an edit. But they always seem to figure out a way to, meet your delivery needs. In-house, is a little bit different because, you've got a project manager or somebody who's kind of looking at all the projects. And if you, throw a change in the final hour and it's going to disrupt something, they'll make that known. But at the same time, I haven't ran into really any issues internally with anybody, I guess, pushing back, but at the same time, I think that, at least in my agency, there's a pretty good hierarchy. We don't it's not like we're trying to create a kind of a system where, you fear the creative directors or things like that. But they do know who's ultimately responsible for the decision at the end of the day. So I think if an editor's dealing with a junior creative team and the editor has more experience and they feel that the change that's being asked for isn't ideal, they might push back on it a little bit. But if the creative director comes in and, makes a call, everybody just adheres.
I think actually in-house you can probably get changes made faster as long as the in-house team is run efficiently, where they're not overbooked, and so they are able to be responsive, and then they're even more responsive than an out-of-house place can be because they're right down the hall. You just walk in and be like, "Hey, can you pop this open? Can you change that?" And they do. Whereas if not, that's a phone call. The producer has to convey that to whoever the editor is, et cetera. And so what could probably be done in the same office in 15 minutes takes an hour to go, out of house.
And so that's the same argument with like home studios too. If I have to do a pickup, they just drop me an email and it's sent straight back to them. So instead of having to, someone book them, drive into so-and-so, all that kind of caper.
I think it is a faster world, that's for sure.
One of the difficult things that I've noticed, which I'm curious to see how things evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, is you've got a lot of industries now that are starting to build their own creative outfits. Like even mine, like I work for a PR company, traditionally known as a PR company, but now we're kind of doing advertising and various digital marketing and social and things like that. So you've got these PR companies that are, building creative teams. You've got clients that are building their own in-house creative teams. But most of them lack any type of real creative leadership. They're really kind of built more like design studios, with some writers. But because of that, it's more about just the execution. It's go create me of this, create me of that, create me of this, create me of that. And they're just reacting to whatever gets created, as opposed to having like real creative directors that understand the essence of a brand and understand how to kind of utilize the tools around them as opposed to the tools that they have available, on their team. So I think, a lot of teams wouldn't even know to go, cast a voiceover talent. They would just, figure it out in-house. And I'm seeing that, like, even at my agency, that's kind of how our team was before I started there, is they were just executing. And when I look across our network of different, offices for my agency, there's a lot of people that have the title creative director, but there's very few actual creative directors. And that goes for a lot of the in-house client teams too.
I think I've seen this go, I don't know if it's full circle or just some sort of tie the knot kind of thing, but so you had end clients hiring agencies going out to, vendors to get the job done, to the creative content made. And then recently the ad agencies have been trying to pull all that in-house. But the thing where it's like kind of inverted and gotten upside down, I've seen this at least once, where a major company, they went out and they basically hired art directors and writers directly from an agency. And then instead of building an in-house, we're going to make our own videos, they just began using vendors. And they just basically like cut the agency right out of it and hired the people from the agency.
And did that go wrong?
The product was similar to anything else that we have produced, because the writers came. I think where it goes wrong is when there's no more agencies to mentor any creatives. But in this particular case, these guys came out of, they were from like an agency that was doing national spots and big campaigns, and they just got hired to work directly for one of their clients.
And you can see why you do that.
And the only difference to me, which I was pleasantly surprised, was like, well, they went over and kind of, grabbed their own talent from the, writing and art directing point of view, but they didn't go through all the trouble of, creating a whole, corner of their office where they've got a production department. They said, we're just going to go to some out-of-house vendors and get that done that way.
Yeah, I see things like that are definitely changing. And that's, we've talked about one of the clients that I had that is doing a very similar thing. But that's a story for another day, I think, because that's an interesting one in itself.
Yeah, I kind of turned the whole thing inside out. And I haven't seen a lot of it, but when I saw it, I was like, this is definitely new.
Yeah.
and for me, a little bit pleasantly surprising simply because the agencies have been pushing back so hard on the, putting everything in house that it's definitely like, where does that leave the individual vendors? It's a tough position for them.
Yeah. Shall we wind up?
I think we should. I think we've monopolised enough of Ian's time today. Thank you very much.
I think we have. So thank you very much, Ian.
You guys.
Always
Thanks,
a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you.
All the best with your new venture. Well, relatively new anyway.
Thank you very much.
That was the Pro Audio Suite. If you have any questions or ideas for a show, let us know via our Facebook, the Pro Audio Suite Podcast.